We get to begin a new book of Torah on this Shabbat HaChodesh. And the book of Torah, book number 3, is called Vayikra, or we like to call it Leviticus. So who would like to come up and talk about Leviticus? You know, there's this misconception that because as modern Jews, as contemporary Jews and Reformed Jews, that we don't engage in animal sacrifice, nor do we ever want to have a third temple rebuilt, nor do we want there to be sacrificial offerings again, that we don't really care about Leviticus, but nothing could be further from the truth. Just ask our B'not Mitzvah. Right? Now, earlier this week, you may have watched a Minute of Torah video, seen me wearing a sweater, which was very uncomfortable, but it was cold that day when we filmed that little episode. And one of the things that I wanted to talk about was this word sacrifice, and I'm going to keep it short tonight. That's always bad news, because I usually go 4 times as long, and I like talking. So what is the word for sacrifice? Do we know? Korban. Some of you watched the video. Bless your hearts. And the root word, as I told you in the video, for korban is karev. Karev is a Hebrew word that can be used for lots of things. It can be used for krovim, which are like relatives, close ones. Karev itself, which means close. Lahakriv, to draw something close or to become close to someone. These are all ways that we can translate one root word into lots of different forms. And because I only got a 74 in biblical Hebrew grammar, I'm going to leave it there because I don't conjugate verbs very well, as it turns out, in Hebrew, or perhaps in English too. However, there is a great Jewish theological concept in that one word, in how it is that we pray. Because really, all of Leviticus is not just about prayer or sacrifice. All of Leviticus is about how do we get karov, how do we get close to God. And that's why Leviticus is probably the most important book in many ways of Torah. You can't really measure which one's more important, but we're here and we're talking about it, so let's just say in a very Jewish way, this is the most important one. Right? It's like when my father goes out to dinner, that was the best restaurant ever. You know, you're 83, Dad, you've been to a few restaurants. No, that's the best one. How many times? This is the best book of the Torah, though, because your B'not Mitzvah is tomorrow and you're here. But this fundamental idea in Judaism is that we get to draw close to God. We get to, if you think about the last part of Exodus, what happens? Where do the Israelites, what forms does God take for the Israelites to sort of know that God is there? God takes 2 forms when the Mishkan is finished, when the tabernacle is finished. Do you remember what those are from last week? They're kind of like natural elements. What? So the one is the pillar of fire, and that is specific to nighttime. Right? It's almost like a moon, a pillar of fire to say, God to say, I am placing a stake in the ground of the Mishkan, I am here. And during the day? Clouds or fog. That God says during the daytime, you can't really see a pillar of fire so well during the daytime, so I'll do fog and misty cloud presence. And so the Jews always know, the Israelites always know that God is there. But Leviticus is now going to take to the next level and talk about how we get close to God. It's rather simple for God to get close to us. We have to pour out our hearts and build the Mishkan, build the tabernacle. It's the opposite of what a lot of synagogues do, right? We build a building and then we hold services. But most synagogues, including Beth Israel, held services in very small communities, in a very small group, and then built the building. Maybe after a month or 2 months or 3 months. But they built the Mishkan, the entire second half of Exodus, and it gets executed, it gets turned on, so to speak, by God's presence in the pillar of fire and the fog. So now, how is it that we get close to God? Well, sacrifice is definitely what they did, but let's talk about the word karov. What does it mean to draw close to God? According to Leviticus, it means three very easy things that are not so easy. Number one, it means to sacrifice, to give a part of yourself or some part of yourself up. Not to become a different person, not to give up who you are at your core, but to give up something that is recognizable to you over. Because God created us in God's image, right? So we might as well do some godlike work around the community, around the synagogue, around the world, give something up. And it doesn't necessarily need to be money, but it should hurt a little bit. Because after all, getting close to people, getting close to the community, getting close to God, getting close is about sacrifice. To love someone, truly love someone, is about sacrifice. I don't know any marriage where both people have to give something up. Right? Compromise, you have to give something up. That's number one. Number two, what does it mean to be close to God? It means to be holy. When we get to chapter 19 of Leviticus, Kedoshim Tehiyu ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohecha, you shall be holy because I, God, am holy, and here are the ways that you can be holy. Observe the Shabbat. Respect your parents. Don't place a stumbling block before the blind or curse the deaf. Argue with each other. Get into fights, but don't let it turn into hatred, and love your neighbor as yourself. Be holy. That's number two. And number three, the entire last quarter of, maybe more than a quarter of Leviticus, mark time. Mark time for Pesach and Sukkot and Rosh Hashanah and Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, and Pesach. I said two of them. I'll put them all. The three pilgrimage holidays. And, of course, Shabbat. But don't just do them for 7 days and 7 days and 2 days. Do it every week on Shabbat. These markings of time are about balance between us and nature. They're all connected to the land. They're all connected to agriculture and farming and crops, especially if you're in the northern hemisphere, right? Mark time. Take some time off. Create a mind, body, physical, and planet Earth balance. Rotate your crops. Proclaim liberty throughout the land. Not for the sake of the Liberty Bell, but for the sake of the land itself and your slaves. And every 50 years, have a jubilee. So that's the third way, mark time. And so when we study Leviticus, please don't just think it's about taking bulls or oxes or goats or incense or wheat and chopping them up and putting them on the big barbecue pit on the altar in front of the Mishkan, the Holy of Holies. But really think of it in terms of how do we get close to God, karov. We get close to God by making ourselves vulnerable, right? By understanding that with love comes sacrifice, and sometimes that sacrifice is not something we want to do. That it means being holy and pursuing holiness. You're not going to be God, but you should try to aspire to holiness because God is holy, and to mark time. That's what this entire endeavor for these next several weeks and all these parshiot is ultimately about. And so, on this Shabbat, take some time and think about new ways of drawing close to God. New ways of drawing close to one another. Because, by the way, the punchline at the end of this is they get a community. And like the book of Numbers or not, which is about the next stage, which is the wilderness, now that we've got all this going on and we've built our perfect and ideal community, let's see what we can do to mess it up. That's kind of what Numbers is about, to some extent. But on this Shabbat, let's enjoy Vayikra, building a community, drawing close to each other, drawing close to God as we prepare for Pesach and the days to come, all of which is holy time. Shabbat Shalom.